Right, let's see if this works. I've literally got my iPhone on a stand. Hello. Looking down on the IPO document. So this is the IPO admission document for loungers. So you've got pictures on the front, obviously. Key things I've done, I've highlighted the key numbers. So here you've got... where's my pen? Okay, this isn't good. This is probably going to be a trial run and then I'll do it properly. I'll use a BIC as a pointer. So I've highlighted the key thing. Placing of 41.6 million at £200. So the placing's raising, what, just over 83 million. A key question is, will that be for the company, raising fresh money for the company, or will it be for selling shareholders? It's actually a mixture of the two. So that's key information we need to find out. Admission to trading on AIM. Market cap here, there are going to be 185 million shares in, 92.5 million shares in total. So you compare that with the amount that are being placed. And the market cap on admission will be 185 million at 200p. That's page 1. Page 2. Now this important information stuff is just legalese, so I don't even bother reading that. You know, it's things like notice to investors in France, Sweden, Switzerland. It's not relevant. So it's always good to just skip through all of that. This is all, unimportant. Now, the key thing with this video, what I'm suggesting is that you just press pause if you want to look at any of the pages in more detail. So, because otherwise the video would just take too long. So please use the pause button when you wish to. Contents there. Timetable doesn't matter because it's already happened. Placing statistics. This is really important. Net proceeds of the placing receivable by the company. That's probably the most important single number. 56.4 million. Number of existing shares to be sold by the selling shareholders. So there are some people selling out. 10.8 million. So that's at £2 a share. That's 21.6 million. So the company's getting well over double, almost triple the amount of money that the selling shareholders are getting. That is already appealing to me, although this is a private equity float. So the money receivable by the company, as it turns out, is actually just reducing debt. So that, again, very important point. Gross proceeds of the placing received by the selling shareholders. Yeah, didn't need to write that down. I just add yellow stickies for important pages. List of people and so on. Definitions and of terms. That doesn't really matter. You can always refer back to the definition of terms if there are any issues. Now, principal shareholders is an important one. Jake Bishop and Lion Capital. This company has had two iterations of private equity ownership. I'm very cautious about private equity-backed businesses. They generally load them up with far too much debt. So it's already got a big question mark over it because of that. Selling shareholders are very important. Justin Carter, Amber Wood, Mark Corner, Anthony Doyle, Warren Lewis and Raj Manek. Oh, these are the director sellers. Sorry. So again, we need to focus on how many are they selling, how many do they retain, how many shares that is, so that which is explained later. Right, information on the group, part 1. This is really the sales pitch. So you will find in some of this that there's, I think, a little bit of sales fluff in it. So they run 146 cafe bar restaurants. Called under various brands on the Lounge and the Cozy Club. The Cozy Club are the larger ones. You can read all this. Strong value for money, something for everyone. It's a sort of general concept. Very rapid growth, strong like-for-like sales. 25 new sites per annum are being opened, so that's a rapid rollout relative to 146 at the moment. Things can go wrong. Selling shareholders to realise part of their investment in the company. History and development. I'm not going to go through all of this. You can just pause frame or look at the document yourself on your own screen. So I'm just highlighting the key points. Lion Capital currently controls the group, or did pre-IPO. That's the growth. Resilient and consistent outperformance. So customers like the format I've put here. The like-for-like sales performance has been very good. Strong pipeline of new sales. Plenty of opportunities now from landlords, I put there. A threat to RBG, not really, is my overall feeling. And my sector expert who I've consulted on this said it's not really a particularly competing format, because RBG, that's Revolution Bars Group, is a late night bar operator primarily. That's where they make their money. They do open all day as well, but they're usually empty, the ones I've seen. More information about the group here. Surprisingly, the female, the customer demographic is 61% female, which is actually quite similar to Revolution Bars. I was a little surprised by that for this particular format. Very evenly spread demographic by age group there, so it really is something for everyone. I've been to one of the sites, a Cosy Club in Bournemouth, and I liked it. It's a good format. My sector expert tells me he knows this business, he knows the people involved with it, and it's a very good operation. So it's a great business. There's no doubt about that. All-day dining. They're claiming here that doing all-day dining is a meaningful barrier to entry for other operators. It really isn't. So I don't agree with that. Lots of places do food all day. Menu and pricing strategy, blah, blah, blah. This caught my eye here. Staff are actively encouraged to offer free drinks and food on an ad hoc basis at their discretion. Dangerous, I've written next to that. Pret a Manger do a similar thing. I think that's okay. I understand the reason they do it. It's to surprise and delight some of the customers who will then become incredibly loyal to the business and so on. But I'd want to know if there are proper management controls on that. Otherwise, it could be a very leaky ship. Very impressive, good format I've written here. This is the like-for-like sales. There's no doubt this business is achieving great performance. Look at that, 4.4, 6, 7.2, 5.26, 5 to 7% like-for-like sales growth of the last 2 or 3 years is very impressive. No plans to open in central London, which I'm quite pleased about. There's too much competition now. List of sites there. I've just flagged ones that I might go and visit at some point. What's this? Again, freeze frame this if you want to look at what I've highlighted. Now, this is interesting here about the CapEx. They're claiming here that they have cheap CapEx, but they really don't. They're saying here they're calling it a flash and dash refurbishment, costing 94 grand. Well, that's a significant amount of money to refurb sites, but they're sort of trying to make out that they don't need to refurb sites, they look better with age. I don't buy all that, I'm afraid. A 94k refurb is a significant refurb, however you dress it up. 15-year leases, average passing rent, blah, blah, blah. These are important. I mean, this is a great time to be doing a rollout because there are so many opportunities from landlords wanting to fill empty units with a good quality operator. So I'm sure they're getting very good deals at the moment, which is a strong positive. They say here rents average 5% of sales. That seems extremely good. Well, actually not extremely good. I think Revolution Bars was maybe 6 or 7%. But I've just queried here, is that including or excluding VAT, which would be quite an important point. Playing down the cost and need for refurbishment, I hear. This is a sales pitch, remember, so you've got to read it slightly sceptically. This is all about new site openings. Here we are, the CapEx. They're saying they're tightly controlled and they get the CapEx on the cheap, really, by having their own in-house build capacity. They employ their own shop fitters, fitter-outers, and they say that's below that of other operators. I don't buy that. They're saying 0.6 million for CapEx for a lounge, which are not huge sites, and $1 million for the Cosy Club, which are larger sites. Well, that $1 million for the larger sites is exactly the same as Revolution Bars' CapEx costs. So I think the CapEx is actually quite high or average. I don't buy any of this that we do it on the cheap. That just doesn't stack up to me. Sales maturity reached after 52 weeks for new sites after a honeymoon period. That's all. Query here, do they have a drinks and food ordering app? I think that's very important going forward. I think people want that, and not many people offer it at the moment. Although I walked past an O'Neill's the other day, and I think they're doing it. I think that's important. Once you settle in, you want to sit down, enjoy your food and drinks, and just be able to have it brought to you. What do we got here? Strategy, 25 new sites per annum. Blah, blah, blah. Internally generated from funds the business is making. They're saying they can achieve cost savings here as they grow. That makes sense. Buying skills. Now, this is an important table here. I have been drawing a line to separate the full years. So this bit here are 52-week periods. 2016, 2017, 2018. But these are 24-week part periods, so the most recent figures, I suppose. 7th of October 2018. Maybe this document... Well, that's strange, isn't it? So the year ends 23rd of April. So why have they prepared part year... Oh, God, is that just the half-year figures? It must be. Yeah, well, 24 weeks. Why not 26 weeks? I don't know. But anyway, look, those are the half-year figures there. Look at the growth in adjusted EBITDA. 60... I think Revolution Bar's adjusted EBITDA is around about 11 or 12 million at the moment. So they were kind of where Revolution Bars were in 2017, but have continued expanding and growing that. The operating profit is low because of all these adjustments. So I'll come on to that later. Seasonality and working capital, some stuff here. Working capital and so on. Operating cash conversion in excess of 100%, you'd expect that because it's a hospitality sector business. Current trading, this is important, obviously. I put 3 ticks there, which means it's very good. Here we are, 24 weeks ended 24th of March 2019, so that's pretty recent. Like-for-like sales growth of 7.7%. That's fantastic. Really, really strong current trading. Ultimate intention to pursue progressive dividend policy. The debt position is such that there's no chance of any dividends in the short term. Is this recording? Yes, it is. Good. Oh, this is the director profiles. I was just flagging here whether this is any of them are also working for competitors. I don't know. That James Cocker is the representative of Lion Capital, so which is still the largest shareholder. So I have read these, but I didn't think there was anything particularly noteworthy in the director CVs. They're saying here only 14% of the staff were from the EU27, so obviously if Brexit does cause a problem in terms of staff, it shouldn't affect them as much as other hospitality businesses that have a higher percentage. You've got information on the employees here. I thought 136 people at head office is quite high, but that does include the property fit-out people, 43 on maintenance and facilities and so on. That's the in-house fit-out team. The rest of it pretty much as I would expect. Finance and IT, that's very similar to when I was an FD for Pilot, the ladies' wear chain. We had about 150 locations as well. Within that 23, you've probably got, I would say, 2 IT people. You've probably got 4 or 5 management accountants. You'll have, I reckon, probably 3 people. They've got probably 3 people in payroll. You'd probably have 3 or 4 people in purchase ledger and 2 or 3 people in sales ledger. So that all stacks up to me. I'm guessing that, but I know similar to the structure I ran when I was an FD, so that's roughly the split. Regional operations management are key, absolutely vital. So then quite a few stores, you're looking at nearly 4,000 staff there actually out at the sites, 3,800, quite a lot. It pays, I like this, it currently pays all employees, regardless of age, at least the national living wage for age 25. That's a great policy, because after all, why should a 21-year-old who's doing the same work as a 26-year-old get paid less? It's not right, and I think that is a good policy. Details of the placing. It gives the split between the new shares. So they've raised about 60 million in new money, which after fees is 56 million, as we saw earlier. Selling shareholders. This is really important. So who's selling and why? Well, actually, it's a partial exit. Well, Lion Capital have been able to sell only 5 million shares. I've got a feeling, that this IPO, it's a sort of partial IPO. It's not a private equity exit. It's private equity exiting in the first stage. I reckon there wasn't much demand for this IPO, and they've just got it away at a less than they would have liked to have sold, but I'm guessing that. These are actually fairly modest sales by management overall. I don't begrudge them banking, what's that, probably about 5 million shares at £2. Management are banking about 10 million quid. Well, that's not unreasonable, given that it's a 185 million quid business. So that's okay, I think. Excuse me, just needed to wet my whistle there. Crazily high fees, 5.2 million fees. What can I say? Although that does include underwriting the whole issue. It could have flopped. But, the advisors make crazy amounts of money out of these things. The money raised by the company is primarily entirely actually used to reduce current debt. And that's the key issue, because I'll come on to it later. Remaining debt is the deal breaker for me on this. You've got here 12-month lock-in, and Lion Capital have got a 6-month lock-in, so quite a short lock-in. They obviously want to reduce further, so I think you'll see in the not too distant future a secondary placing to reduce Lion Capital's stake further. Now, they've got a value creation plan. I hate them, so I'm going to have to look at that at paragraph 8.1. That's a big negative for me. Well, depending on the terms of it. Discretionary all-employee share plan. Okay, it's not bad. I think it's a nice touch to give individual staff share options. The operational staff, I mean, not just the directors. Admission to trading, settlement and dealing arrangement doesn't really matter because it's already happened. Corporate governance. You can freeze frame that if you're interested in any of that. Relationship with Lion Capital. So they will own 38.6% of the business after the float still, so still a controlling shareholder. You see quite a few of these things you can skip through the pages. Now, the risk factors, I used to just ignore this, but I've now started paying a lot more attention to it, because I find if you sit down and quietly read all this, all sorts of things pop into your head about potential downside, and that's a good thing. So I've highlighted things that I think the main issue for this business is staffing costs, rising minimum wage, national wage, other payroll levies like apprenticeship levy, all those sorts of things. Staff shortages as well are a problem in the hospitality sector in some areas. So really, staffing costs is the big threat to the business, I think, other than all the other obvious ones like the economy, consumer sentiment, and so on. What have I put here? Oh, this risk. The group may not be successful in attracting suitable employees or retaining key personnel. Now, Revolution Bars was a good example of this risk, in that the main reason Revolution Bars has had a period of tough trading was because they lost some key operational staff. Area managers left and took with them the best store managers, site managers. So that is a very important risk, keeping your key personnel. More risks here. This is an important one. The group may not be able to maintain its culture. I think you often find with businesses like this, they do very, very well up to a point, and then when they expand beyond the level where everybody knows the chief executive and so on, they can lose that entrepreneurial and family feel of culture. And that can sow over-expansion, and maybe too rapid expansion, has been known to sow the seeds of future decline. So that's an important thing to think about. This is interesting. The group has not historically registered its intellectual property. Is that a problem? Probably not, but it's worth noting. That's the... I put there about the intellectual property doesn't really matter. Each bar has a different brand. That's the other thing. They call them all ending in the letter O. So the one in Brighton's called Campo, which I thought was quite funny. Geographic spread is okay. So this was saying potential loss from uninsured events. If you've got 150 sites spread over the country, that doesn't really matter. poor economic conditions. That reminded me really of the operational gearing here. You've got a business with a 75% gross margin. So any downturn, any recession, sales will drop. That will have an operationally geared impact because a lot of the costs are largely fixed. So that's a very obvious point, but it's worth remembering. A small number of key suppliers they mention here. I don't think that's really a problem in this sector. You can change to other big suppliers. There are lots of different breweries and drinks manufacturers. You can substitute if needs be. Various points here about suppliers, which I didn't think were terribly important. So now this is all the stuff about cost of labour and employment risk. Again, freeze frame that if you want to look at what I've highlighted. But I think this is it mentions automatic enrolment pensions, that the employer contribution is rising from 2% to 3%. In April 2019, which will affect a lot of companies. I think this is really bringing home the risk that any company that employs a large number of people, whether it's Tesco's or Marks and Spencer's or any of these retail and hospitality companies, are facing really big headwinds on employee costs, which we know about. But it could push profits down across the board. It mentions potential unionisation of workers here as well. Again, that's worth thinking about as the labour market is very tight at the moment. Risks, okay so far, but early days I've put here. Oh, market value of the shares on the market. And there's a point here about lack of liquidity in the shares. Now, I've put check the post-IPO major shareholdings. What is the free float? The big problem you have with a lot of placings is that the advisors want to earn their fees doing as little work as possible, so they place the shares in big blocks with institutions. You then have very little aftermarket, and so when the shares actually list, there's very little traded. So what you really need is to have some institutions feeding stock into the market in response to private investor demand. Otherwise, you don't get it. It can take several years before a decent liquid market gradually emerges. It's a very bad system. They should work out a way. I think when companies IPO, they should include an allotment for private investors. Then you get the liquidity. I think if you're paying $5 million in fees and that's not been done, then you're not getting value for money. Not made any commitment to pay dividends into the future. I don't think it can. Well, it clearly can't pay dividends at the moment because the debt's far too high. But I'll come on to that. Substantial shareholders. Lion Capital, Alex Riley and Jake Bishop will hold 52.7% in total. So pretty tightly held. So nobody can take it over without the agreement of the major shareholders, basically. Excuse me. Right, part 3, historical financial information, which has been reported on here by PwC. They're emphasising that they haven't audited the 24-week most recent figures or comparatives. Fair enough. They're saying here that the financial information table is okay, and here this is okay. They've said, we've taken all reasonable care to ensure that the information contained in this report is, to the best of our knowledge, in accordance with the facts and contains no omissions likely to affect its import. Now, as we know, audit reports, I mean, look, it means somebody's reviewed it, but it's certainly no guarantee that everything's 100% correct, as we know. Right, now we get on to the summarised historical financial information. I've drawn a line down there again to separate the full year figures and the audited figures. I mean, this is all pretty self-explanatory, really. You can see revenue growing very fast due to the rollout and the positive like-for-likes, but mainly the rollout. Excuse me. The gross profit there, that will include wages costs within cost of sales, because otherwise that would be a lot higher. Now look, the operating profit isn't very much, is it? Considering the market cap was 185 million. Let's just make sure I haven't... Yeah, no, that's fine. The camera angle's okay. The operating profit isn't very good, frankly, for 185 million, but... And look at the huge finance costs there. That's because of the private equity ownership. Massive interest charges. And that debt has not been cleared by this IPO. That's a key point to take away on that. What they do down the bottom here is they provide the adjusted figures. So they're taking the operating profit or loss from up here. Then they are adding back exceptional items. That was when they refinanced from one private equity company to another. So yeah, that is genuinely exceptional. Share-based payment charges, I don't think those are exceptional. It's just part of remuneration. So personally, I would probably add those back in. Site pre-opening costs, I'll go with that because it's if they're opening 25 new sites a year, 2 million divided by 25 is what? 201 divided by 25. 80 grand per unit. A little bit on the high side for pre-opening costs, but not unreasonable, so I can live with that. That's, rent and costs before it actually opens for trading. You have to pay rent while it's being fitted out, you have to train up and pay your staff before you open and so on. So there are genuinely pre-opening costs. I tend to find anything under 100k is acceptable per site to me. So you can see now with the adjusted operating profit, they've got a very nice progression there. And then the depreciation's added back to give you adjusted EPR. Why? Adjusted EPR matters. All these numbers matter. There's not one that's correct and everything else is wrong. You look at all of them and consider them in context. What I've done there is saying, looking at that progression, it looks as if adjusted EBITDA might rise up to 20 million in the current year. That's, just finished actually, 2019. And you might have, say, 24 million the following year. So you value the business, these type of businesses, on a multiple of EBITDA typically. And the bank facilities are based on EBITDA, so that's another reason why it matters. Balance sheets here. Now, the balance sheet's really ropey. This is pre-IPO, remember, and they did raise 56 million. But even if you add on the 56 million onto that, negative net liabilities, you would only have positive of about 40, what am I doing? Adding 56 million to that. So you'd have positive about 46 million net assets, but you've got 113 goodwill. So take then minus 9.4 net assets, add on the 56 million net proceeds to the company from the IPO, 46.6, take off the 113 goodwill, and you've got negative net tangible assets of minus 66.4 million, which I think is bloody awful. That, to me, would be a deal breaker. I just don't like negative net tangible assets. So I got a big first red flag. The balance sheet, even after the IPO proceeds, is ropey. Awful balance sheet, normal for private equity-backed company. Key issue, how much debt is being cleared, repaid? Well, I come on to that later. 56 million from the IPO. Borrowings will remain high after the IPO at about 5 times EBITDA. So debt is a problem. So I've put a question mark here. What about the bank covenants? I never really look at this statement, changes in equity. It's all about the reserves on the balance sheet. Change in equity doesn't really matter. Now, cash flows here, this looks pretty much as I would expect it to. You've got some big items here to do with the change in private equity owner. That's irrelevant now. You've got big numbers here for CapEx, as you'd expect, for the new sites. 18,595 divided by 25 new sites. It's about 750,000 per site. That ties in with the figures we saw earlier of 0.6 million for lounges and 1 million for cosy clubs. Given that most of the new openings are lounges, that figure, that I've just sense checked that. There'll be a bit of maintenance capex on the existing sites, but they said earlier that's only 10 grand. So probably only about 1 million of that is maintenance capex. Here you've got more stuff related to the refinancings, which don't really matter post-IPO. So, right, now we've got the notes to the historical accounts. Yeah, here you are. That's just the change of private equity owner. Doesn't really matter now. I read all this, but just a query on the fixture and fittings depreciation charges. They say here 6.67% depreciation. Then saying 33% straight line or over the life of the lease. So I'm not quite sure. That's just a question mark. I don't quite understand that. I need to query that and find out. Are they saying 6.67% is the average? I don't really know. If it is, it seems low. Which could be, of course, a low depreciation charge boosts profitability. So I'd want to check that. Oh, this didn't really matter. They just changed the accounting policy, but it reduced the depreciation charge by 561,000. They're saying that original artwork, they were depreciating at 5 years. They're now depreciating at 15 years. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. Who can say? But not particularly material in the context of 18 million EBITDA. I mean, it might indicate perhaps a move towards more aggressive accounting policies. I don't know. Okay, now this is, again, I put a question mark over. They're saying cash includes cash in transit in respect of payments made on debit or credit cards. As I'm sure everyone knows, there's a sort of 2 to 4 day cycle where you pay on your card and the company actually receiving the money. I would argue that's a debtor, a receivable, rather than actual cash. So that, again, seems a slightly aggressive accounting treatment. So I'm just getting a feeling they might be, it generally seems to be leaning towards slightly aggressive accounting policies. So, that would boost profits, so perhaps needs to be questioned. I didn't find anything interesting in there. Now, non-GAAP measures. They're saying, this is interesting, directors use adjusted EBITDA as a primary KPI managing the business. They point out here it's also the measure used by the banks for the purposes of assessing covenant compliance, which is absolutely right. It doesn't matter if people don't like that particular measure. It's what the banks use, so we have to pay a lot of attention to it. I've said here, okay, but scope for abuse. That's relating to site pre-opening costs. Companies can really put whatever they want in there. There's no sort of standard definition of what pre-opening costs should be. And it says here they primarily include costs incurred before opening and preparing for launch. Well, what else do they include? That seems a bit odd to me. Not a major point, but just something I'd like to, if I meet management, these are the sort of things I'll just query with them. Now, this is interesting here about the new lease, IFRS 16 leases provision. It's going to radically change the accounts of a lot of companies with multi-sites. Here it says they'll have to recognise a lease liability of 72 million and a right-of-use asset of approximately 63 million, and so on. Accruals and deferred income will be reduced by approximately 8 million. That relates to rent-free and reverse premiums. This new lease standard is nonsense, absolute nonsense. So I'm not looking forward to that coming in. The point is, if a site is trading profitably, very profitably, then the lease is not a liability, it's an asset. You could actually sell that site for millions to a competitor. So the idea that you just put a huge artificial liability on the balance sheet, the point is that, well, it's not an artificial liability. Yes, you'll have to pay those rents, but you'll generate revenue and profit at the same time as paying the rent. If you're going to recognise the future lease rental costs, then you should also recognise the future business rates on those sites as well, because you'll be liable for those. You should also stick on the balance sheet the utilities costs, and while you're at it, you should stick all the staffing costs on the balance sheet as well. It's nonsense, absolutely ludicrous. So I think it'll be one of these accounting standards, a bit like goodwill, where people just adjust all these daft entries off the balance sheet and P&L again to get to the true picture. Okay, not much else on here of interest. Here you've got some individual costs on the P&L that I've highlighted. So staff costs at 38.8% of revenues. The gross margin works out at 74.4% there. So you can see staffing costs really are by far the biggest individual cost, as you would expect. Rents are only 5.6% of revenues, which is low. This is based on the revenues of that year. So you can work these out quite simply. Employees and director, I look at this is not terribly important. I just worked out a few figures here. That it's an average of 24 staff per branch, which given the extended trading hours that sounds reasonable to me. You have kitchen and front of house and bar staff, cleaners and so on. That seems about right to me. I've worked out here the average staff costs 15.9k per person. They say, but that includes the directors, so you could adjust that out and it would be a bit lower. That ties in with the fact that they're paying nearly all their staff national living wage or a bit above. Again, I'm just sort of reasonableness checking these to make sure everything looks about right, which they do. Now, what's this? Oh, key management compensation, very, very low. So I've said, this was when it was a private company, of course, so I've said bound to increase a lot now, but I don't think it actually necessarily will. Preference share, they've got preference shares with very high interest rates. So yeah, this is a breakdown. The finance costs are very high. So the key issue is how much of that debt will go as a result of the IPO. Income tax, nothing particularly out of the ordinary there. It's a private equity business loaded up with debt, so they're tax dodging, obviously. That's the way private equity works, so it's paying very little in tax, which is a scandal, actually, but nobody seems to have noticed in the political and class and amongst the public. Exceptional items is as I would expect. Professional fees, change in ownership. Yeah, earnings per share doesn't matter because the share structure has changed since then. And here, property, plant and equipment, there are no freeholds, so it's just worth bearing in mind this business has no asset backing. Okay, that's half of the IPO document covered, which I think is pretty good. So I'm going to have a rest now. That's 36 minutes. That's pretty good. I'll do a second video of the other half of the document. I hope you found that interesting and tune in for section 2. Right, I'm going to reward myself with a can of wife beater. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that, should I? It was a joke. So, all right, I'll shut up now. Bye.